Hola, hola, I am Andrea Sarmiento, and this is one of the reviews that I'm going to do that I've been doing and that I will start doing of the books that I read and the books that inspire me somehow. So today we are going to talk about The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton. So just to give a bit of an introduction of this book, we work for months on end. We save, we sacrifice, we cut back spending, not just financially, but we do sacrifice our time and our space, all for a single goal, to be able to travel, or at least that is my case. So normally when we plan our holidays, we have a giant list of like the places we want to go. We always have the where clear and perfectly defined. But let's be honest, we rarely stop to talk about and to question why are we travel and what for are we traveling. And that is what we and what is exactly what we are looking for in jumping into that plane. So today we're going to answer that by analyzing the book The Art of Travel by the philosopher and writer Alain de Botton, published in the year 2002. This work falls within the genre of philosophical essay and travel literature. The thesis of my review is clear just from the start, which is this is an indispensable book for people who, like me, invest a lot of time and money in traveling, because it forces you to look inwards before looking at the map. So just to go very broadly into the context and the premise of this book, Alain de Botton's central thesis in this book is not to give you a tourist guide or on monuments or restaurants. Of course, that is not the case, but to help us navigate on those whys and what fors that we currently ignore or don't even ask ourselves when we pick a destination. The author uses not only his own experience, but he also brings combined perspectives from different philosophers, writers, artists, to dissect the psychology behind our travels. So it's super interesting, and I have to say it's very digestible. It not becomes this super academic um, essay. And why do I think this analysis matters a lot today? And despite the fact that this book has now over 20 years old, I think its relevance is absolute in our current reality, because lately this idea of how technology and convenience have isolated us more and more and has been playing heavily on my mind. I've been thinking a lot about this, because in my personal experience living in London and facing a society and a culture that is way more introvert than my own, I've I've been experiencing a huge conflict over how this supposed convenience and individual preference sometimes mean that we see each other less and less and want to make fewer joint plans. Everything is so convenient. So if you want to watch a movie, you can do it right there, right now, in your own place. You don't need to manage agendas or like calendars with anyone. But in my opinion, watching a movie with someone is a completely different experience, right? So I've been thinking a lot about that. And of course, when I read this book, I was thinking about that in the travel. So for example, when before on my 20s, for example, it never crossed my mind to go on a trip alone. I never even think about it. No matter how much I wanted to visit a place, if there was no one with me, I simply didn't go. That was, for example, the case for Thailand. For like since 2017, I was planning to go there, but my companions always pulled out. And for that reason, the trip was always canceled. It wasn't until last year, 2025, that my cousin organized her 4-month trip, and I finally jumped in because for me, I still need to experience those remote places with someone. And that is where I find the why and the what for my travels. I want to understand why I want to experience some places with a companion and why do I want to experience some other places alone. So this book is aimed to anyone who needs to understand what they are really looking for when they change hemispheres. There are some core ideas that I want to, like, I am not going to take you through this whole book. I just want to pick the core ideas that I think are very important. So this book is divided in 5 chapters: departures, motives, landscape, art, and return. To break down the core work, we are going to focus, as I said, on the most valuable pillars, in my opinion, and the lessons that completely transform the perspective, my perspective, in traveling. So the first pillar is anticipation versus reality. This is a really good one because this first chapter focuses on the anticipation, where the author is, in addition to using a couple of specific places, supports his thinking based on certain philosophers. The bottom gives us a very detailed description of a rainy day in London and how, upon seeing a holiday brochure about Barbados, the idea of a beach holiday with sun and warmth played perfectly against the contrast of London's gloomy and dark weather. He gives us that example of his personal experience to talk about how weather sometimes become igniter for us to make decisions related to traveling. And not only the weather that we are experiencing, the real weather, but also the idea of a weather. It can be a very powerful trigger for emotions that lead us to make decisions about where we want to go. And he also explains how what we imagine our trip will be, and this for me is like an amazing idea, it can be very different from what actually happened, right? So many times what we imagine our trip will be is a fantasy, right? We imagine things. And in that fantasy, we omit and eliminate periods of boredom, problems that may exist during the trip, and the uncomfortable moments we might experience. The reality regarding our expectations and the reality of the travel is that those fantasies we create around the anticipation are rarely include ourselves in them. And that is precisely the reason why the fantasy looks and feels so dazzling, right? However, once we arrive to the destination that we've been dreaming of and we are fantasizing about, we find that our body, with all its discomforts, and our minds, with all its worries, accompany us in this journey. Coming with them on the trip will completely negate the fantasy that we created in our minds, right? So now of course, we cannot stop taking our minds, our bodies to our travels. So what is to be done? Because definitely we are not going to stop traveling either, because they do help. So what the button recommends us is simply to accept a clear reality. And here I'm going to open quotes for a paragraph that he writes. And he says, our capacity to draw happiness from aesthetics, objects, or material goods, in fact, seem critically dependent on our first satisfying a more important range of emotional and psychological needs. Amongst them, the need for understanding, for love, expression, and respect. So basically, in other words, if you are bored, if you're conflicted about a specific situation or a specific person, and you have a lot of stress, the chances of a place, no matter how beautiful and relaxing it may be, won't resolve your problems. It is not going to resolve those conflicts or that boredom that you came with. When we want to escape somewhere, normally what that really means is that we want to escape from ourselves. And that can hardly be achieved. So basically what he's telling us here is a beautiful place can help, but if you haven't resolved yourself within, it is going to be very difficult that that place alone just help you to reset. The second pillar, and this is one that I loved, and is art. He uses art in several instances of this book, and it's beautiful because it's not only a book that has words, but also it has a lot of like pictures and different artwork, for example. So it's very enjoyable. So, as I said, de Botton uses art to develop several ideas. The first is about how places of transit have inspired many artists. So hotels, airports, planes, trains. These places have been characterized as a particular nourishing and fertile space for the generation of art. And many artists have represented these places in their work. So he does a very deep dive into why this happens, but I'm just going to read a bit of a quote that gives a hint on it. So Alain gives us an idea of why this happened in the following paragraph. Every time the mind goes blank, having hit on a difficult idea, the flow of my consciousness is assisted by the possibility of looking out the window. Locking on to an object and following it for a few seconds until a new coil of thought is ready to form and can unravel without pressure. And that is, as I said, he goes very deep into this idea. I am going to leave it there, but there is a lot of reasons why those transit places have a lot to do with art and how they nurture the generation of new artwork. Then another place where art has a major significance in this book is that art is one of the elements that run through the entire book, but there is, as I said, one specific chapter when he talks about the anxiety and obsession that we humans have to possess beauty. That especially happens when we travel, because we are looking at different places, scenarios, and landscapes that we have never seen, and we want to possess that somehow. And that is something that all humans have. So normally, while we travel, we see objects and landscapes that, because of their beauty, we want to possess. And many times, the only way we find easy to do this is by taking a photo, right? Just taking out your phone, taking a photo of what you're looking at, and hopefully the photo is going to capture that beauty. Because specifically, some of that beautiful landscapes and objects that we are seeing, due to the position of the sun or the lightning or the movement of things, will not exist in the next instant, right? Beauty tends to be very ephemeral. So de Botton reminds us an idea that comes from a philosopher called Ruskin, where he explains to us that there are several ways in which we believe we can possess beauty, but the only real one under his premise is to understand it. And this is how he explains it. There is only one way to possess beauty properly, and that is through understanding it. through making ourselves conscious of the factors, psychological and visual, that are responsible for it. And subsequently, Ruskin proposes that the most effective way to do this is through art, by either drawing or writing about that beauty that you are seeing. Even if the technique doesn't exist within us, this chapter explains how we can actually possess beauty by drawing it or by writing about it. And this chapter closes with a very powerful phrase that, of course, for me goes very, very deep and close to my heart, which is the twin purpose of art: to make sense of pain and to fathom the sources of beauty. I normally tend, when I write, tend to go to the make sense of pain, because I use writing to transit and to transmute my challenges. But this phrase for me is very important because it challenged me to also use writing to fathom the sources of beauty in my life. Um, and then there is another very beautiful concept, that is the sublime. So to this is added another concept that literally blew my mind in the book, that is the exploration of sublime, what it means and why it exists. The author defines it in the following way: a landscape could arouse the sublime only when its suggested power greater than that of humans are threatening to them. Sublime places embody a defiance to our will. We are humiliated by what is powerful and mean, but all by what is powerful and noble. So the bottom describes to us how the sublime is the best way to feel small, weak, and powerless, and feel good about it. A landscape that is sufficiently powerful and beautiful, which allows itself to be admired, is that which is sublime and makes us feel how small and insignificant we are. And that for me is a mind-blowing concept, because we always think that feeling small, weak, and powerless feels horrible. But when you are in front of a landscape that is so powerful and so beautiful that you feel completely insignificant, it actually feels good. I think most of the people that have experienced this concept, most of us have experienced it. Probably a few of us can explain it, and this is where I found the explanation of that feeling of the sublime. The third pillar, and that is one that really that I could like take to my life and apply it today, is what he calls the journey around the room and the traveler's mindset. So the journey around the room is a super powerful chapter that begins with a forceful phrase, which is: the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room. And this idea comes from a philosopher called the Maitre, who tells us that a large part of the pleasure we experience in our travels depends on our mind, or on the mindset that we carry. And he calls it the traveler's mindset, rather than the places we actually go. Therefore, if we could apply that mindset in our own life and to our everyday places, perhaps we could extract the same pleasure from our common places as from places we have never seen. And what is so special about the traveler's mindset? De Botton explains to us that receptivity will be the main characteristic. He explains that we face new places with humility, curiosity, interest, intrigue, and admiration. Those attitudes with which which we do not normally face our daily life. So the maître, the philosopher that Alain brings to this chapter, gives us an account of us on his second volume that he calls Room Travel. And he expresses his frustration at seeing that we people don't appreciate the beauty of the sky that covers us all, when it only requires looking out the window. So Javier de Maitre ultimately show us that we have a lot to understand and see in our daily routine, and therefore invite us to explore our own life, the spaces we already know, and the people that we see daily before setting off to another hemisphere. So for a conclusion and recommendation, personally, this book helped me to understand how a large part of my current experience depends on how I decide to stand in front of it, how I decide to interpret it and understand it. The concepts it explained about anticipation, possessing beauty, the sublime, and the everyday basically led me to understand that travel moves you from within. The exterior and going to charming and lovely places are not going to move anything if I internally am not open to moving and to allowing humility and curiosity to direct my understanding of the world. Not only in the places I travel to, but also in my day-to-day life, in the places I currently inhabit. I feel that this book has been so important for me, especially in my own migration process, because there was a moment where I passed from the awe of London and from this traveler's mindset to the conclusion that this would be indeed the place where I wanted, where I chose to live for a long time. In that, I began to see London in a different way. And due to different circumstances, I lost the awe and I lost the curiosity. So when I was reading this book, it reminded me that I can adopt that mentality, that traveler's mindset at any moment, that it is more a decision than a circumstance, and that understanding myself and knowing what it is here is what will ultimately make each trip more exciting, amazing, and pleasant. I highly recommend this book due to the solidity of its strongest concepts, the deconstruction of our own expectation, the true procession of beauty through understanding, and the ability to activate the travel's mindset in our own routine. So if you're planning your next destination, or if you feel that traveling no longer fulfill you like before, you do have to read The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton.